Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, a marketing exec, chief jargon buster, and I help ground AI in your practical day-to-day.
And I'm Kyle. I live at the intersection of data, product, and strategy, and I do my best to turn the technical AI chaos into something you can actually use.
We go beyond the overhyped headlines and give you the unvarnished truth about AI, what's real, what's hype, and what actually matters for your business.
Every week, we simplify the complex, spotlight the risks, and give you practical tools to make smarter decisions as the landscape rapidly shifts around us.
From agents to commerce to prompt engineering and vibe coding, we deliver honest insights, actionable strategies, and zero gatekeeping.
Let's dive in.
This is Early Adopter. Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess.
And I'm Kyle. And this week's going to be a little bit different. Rather than jumping into our weeks, we need to tell you something that probably feels a little un-early adopter of us right now. And we're actually going to take a break this week.
That is shocking. I know. We are going to be taking some time off for the holidays. We have been heads down on AI content since we launched this podcast in May without a break. And if you've been listening, you know the pace has been a lot, shall we say? Yeah.
Almost an understatement. I think every single week is just a fire hose of information. Honestly, the holidays are the perfect time to really test some of the stuff we've been meaning to try out. I know you have some plans to test some tools.
Yep.
I have some AI tools I've bookmarked that I keep telling myself I would get to. I have a couple projects for some automations. So I think this is the moment for everyone to start playing around with a little bit of things while we're off.
But while we are out, we are not leaving you hanging. We are re-releasing some of our most popular episodes. These are the ones that people have requested. They're the ones that people have told us have actually changed how they work. So we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to listen to those ones.
And the data shows that they're the most popular. So we think these are the ones that you need to really cover in order to level up. So if you're new to the podcast, this is actually a great way to catch up. But if you've listened before, I think they're worth a re-listen, especially because some of these are really important for, how you're actually going to use AI and if you want to set yourself up for success in 2026. Perspective can change a lot of that. And with how rapidly everything moves, this is a great time.
So we will be back in early January with some fresh content and some fresh ideas. But before we go completely dark over the holidays, we wanted to invite you to something.
Yes, we're very excited about this. It's our first webinar.
It is.
We're hosting a live conversation alongside our friend Sean Bardwaj from Breakthrough Growth Partners. You'll remember him from our 3-part series around AI policy. And we're going to be discussing the typical pitfalls that derail AI adoption in companies, how to avoid them, and set yourself up for success in 2026.
The webinar will be happening on the 4th of February, and we will link to it in the show notes. Or alternatively, you can head over to maven.com, which is where we will be hosting it, and you can search for it and sign up for it there.
Yeah, so grab a spot. It's going to be really good. We promise. We're very excited about it. And it's leading towards a much larger educational series that we'll be covering for the rest of the year. So definitely check it out. You're not going to want to miss it.
In the meantime, enjoy the re-releases, have a play around with some AI while we're away, and we will see you in January. In the meantime, just as a reminder, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, basically everywhere. We are at early_adopter. Remember, no E in adopter. Yeah.
And if you've got an AI story or a question you want us to tackle when you're back, send it our way at hello@earlyadopter.ai. Remember, no E in the adopter. And until then, happy holidays, everyone.
Yes, happy holidays. I'm going to show you why, if you really master prompt engineering, it gives you a huge advantage because it really does make all the difference and makes AI that much more effective. Right. So before we dive into the technical stuff, we're just going to recap again why this actually matters for our audience, for entrepreneurs and small business owners, because when we're working with clients or when you're, working with your customers, we're not using AI to do something like writing poetry. And let's face it, it's probably not going to write the best poetry. We need investor ready board updates, client emails that actually sound like they came from me specifically, or insights from sales data that we can actually act on, it's actually useful information.
Just a quick aside, Jess, I beg to differ. I have been using it to write a little bit of poetry, and it has helped me out, and it has been quite good.
Seriously?
Just,
okay,
I think...
stand corrected. I never would have thought that you would be using it to write poetry, but there you go.
Poetry, if for this and that, but my family has probably noticed a noticeable difference in the quality of my card writing.
Look, that's a great use case. Why have we never talked about that as a use case? I never know what to write on birthday cards or whatever. It's always there we go.
You're welcome. You're welcome. But this is where prompting becomes very critical, right? So vague prompts give you vague results. Bad data in, bad data out. You don't want a fluffy 2-paragraph response when what you need is a bullet point risk assessment for your CEO, your CFO, etc.
Exactly. And, it's not too dissimilar to working with a team or an agency if you've ever worked in a team that oversees a creative agency, because if you can't brief someone clearly, you won't get the good work back. If you just give them a vague brief, you're going to get that vague response back. And AI is exactly the same, except now with GPT. God, I'm really struggling to say GPT-5.
I hear so many.
Okay, let's try that again. Chat GPT-5. The stakes are higher because it actually follows instructions so precisely that it matters even more now than it perhaps did before.
It's the difference between managing a junior employee who kind of gets what you want versus managing a senior employee who will follow your instructions to the letter. Even the poorly worded ones, and that's going to become very important distinction here. GPT-5 is more like a contract lawyer than an intern. It will execute the contract exactly as it is written, whether you phrased it correctly or not.
Which can be an issue if you're not careful. We've seen GPT-5 get stuck trying to follow contradictory instructions that GPT-4 probably would have just ignored. So that's an interesting and significant difference between the two models. So businesses that really master that clear communication with AI are really going to have a massive advantage in this space.
I think that's really an important distinction to focus on. This, if you give it contradictory instructions, how it's going to trip up the model. And what's changed since our original episode, we used to focus on getting, AI to understand us. How do we, give it the context? Now it's about being precise enough for AI that it actually listens. So let's walk through what's actually new with GPT-5. So first up is reasoning. We've talked about this before, but I think we can recap because it's really important. GPT-4 was decent at working through problems, but GPT-5 has what OpenAI calls a reasoning router. This is actually kind of a little agentic, right?
Okay, so what is this reasoning router then?
Yeah, so think of it like having an employee who can automatically decide whether to give you a quick answer or really think it through. So GPT-5 has a fast mode for simple stuff and a deep thinking mode for complex problems. And the key is you can control which one it uses. You've probably seen this when you've typed in a response to GPT-5. You see it come up with a little bit of text that says thinking through, and you can say, or give me the quick answer.
So that's a useful thing to be able to switch back and forth between the two, because I think that was one of the initial criticisms around this.
Yeah. And if you add phrases like think through this step by step or analyze this carefully before answering, GPT-5 will shift into that deeper reasoning mode. It's like telling someone, take your time on this one. Now, honestly, most of my prompting that I do, it tends to go into the deeper reasoning, right? And we'll talk about when we should use deeper reasoning so we can kind of get into that kind of strategic lens of what to use. But typically I see that deeper reasoning, but sometimes you may want to click on just, hey, do the quick analysis.
This is actually a great feature. It's a really interesting feature that they've introduced because some questions don't need a big, long, deep response. It can be a little bit more high level. And then obviously some of them need a much deeper or more real analysis. So if I want to ask, what's the weather today? That doesn't need a big, long, deep, response. But if I'm asking like, what are the risks in this partnership agreement? Then obviously you want it to go really deep and you want it to really think about that.
Exactly. The next big change for GPT-5 is the context length. Now, I'm very happy about this, as you know, because I constantly am talking about data.
Yes.
But, remember in our original episode, we talked about GPT-4 handling maybe, 8,000 tokens or 32,000 tokens. And again, we talked about tokens, kind of combinations of words.
And we had to be so careful about what we included because it would very easily or quickly rather
Mhm.
reach the limit of the token. So that this is a good addition.
Yeah. And, and just to go even farther back than GPT-4, if we talk about some of the original like GPT-3, there was this kind of needle in the haystack where the more context you gave it, actually the worse that your output would be because it
Hmm.
was difficult in finding those specific things. Well, that's really no longer the case. GPT-5 is a lot better at that needle in the haystack performance. And GPT-5 handles 400,000 tokens.
Wow.
So if you think about that, that's roughly 800 pages of text.
That's substantially larger than GPT-4. So like right now, if I'm pulling together something like a campaign strategy, I've got to summarize everything. So that's the brand guidelines, competitor analysis, customer research. But with GPT-5's 400,000 token context window, I can just include all of it and it's going to synthesize that strategy without losing any detail. So for any business owner or for an entrepreneur, that means that you can add much more context, much more rich detail without having to be as discerning as in what you provide. So it might be a bit of an overkill, but we constantly are talking about the importance of context.
That's exactly the point. No more chopping up documents or losing context. And you don't also have to worry that it's going to find the right context. Give it the full picture. Where it gets really interesting is what GPT-5 has what researchers call surgical precision in following instructions. So it's the most steerable model OpenAI has built to date. So tone, length, format, even output structure follow your words exactly. But that precision also means that vague or, as we talked about earlier, conflicting prompts can cause it to stumble where GPT-4 would have just glossed over it. For example, if I give it contradicting instructions, GPT-4 would have just followed the last one. Now GPT-5 will try to get it to answer both, which is going to confuse it. So if you tell it, format this as a table, use a professional tone, keep it to 3 bullet, and it does exactly that. But there's going to be a catch.
What's the catch?
So if you contradict yourself in the prompt, like saying be brief early on, but then asking for a detailed analysis later, that's where GPT-5 gets confused, trying to reconcile both instructions. GPT-4 would have just picked, that latest one and moved on.
So it's more obedient, but it's also more literal. So from a management perspective, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? Like good employees follow instructions precisely, which means you better give them good instructions. Whereas ChatGPT-5 is less sycophantic than ChatGPT-4, so it won't just agree with you or fill in the blanks that you left vague. So it's pros and cons.
That's a perfect analogy. And I think we've heard a lot of people complain about the new version. And I think there were some growing pains, but I think when people are saying, I'm not getting as good of results, I think it points to this issue in prompting. And, not a lot of people have the tools where they realize that this is the issue.
That's a really good point that I think most people are not going to be aware of, because I was just talking about this with a friend the other day who is really hating ChatGPT-5. So that would actually explain a lot in that she's not changed her way of prompting, but actually it does make a big difference.
Using prompt frameworks is going to get you most of the way there. But again, to the point of this episode, we need to update it a little bit.
Totally.
Now, the last major change that I think affects how we prompt is GPT-5 has built-in personality modes. And this is really, really interesting.
Yeah. So tell me about this, because this actually sounds really relevant for brand voice, which is obviously a very important thing.
Yeah. So GPT-5 has 4 preset personalities.
Okay.
It has a robot for straight to business responses.
Okay.
It has a listener for empathetic communication, cynic for dry wit, and nerd, love that one, for enthusiastic detail.
I feel like you and I are going to be nerd for enthusiastic detail. That feels like exactly what we're aiming to go for. So I guess that means instead of writing respond with empathy and understanding, which is kind of what you would have done in the past every time you're drafting something like a customer service email, you can just switch to listener mode. So it's kind of automatically got that built-in empathetic feel to it.
Exactly. It has tone presets. So for quarterly reports, I might use robot mode. Just give me the facts.
Yeah.
For team feedback, listener mode, right? Get a little bit more empathy. For brainstorming sessions, give me that nerd mode, where it gets really detailed about the possibilities and gives you potential paths to go down for your deep research, nerd mode all day. Now, you can still give it your own tone instructions to go have it be its own way, but this, I think, at least provides a little bit of a simple way to get into a tone that you might want.
Yeah.
There's another big upgrade we haven't mentioned yet, both in creativity as well as coding. So GPT-5 isn't just better at following instructions, it's also the strongest writing collaborator and coding partner OpenAI has released. So whether you're drafting a polished investor update, brainstorming 10 out-of-the-box marketing ideas, or even building and debugging an app, GPT-5 is noticeably sharper than GPT-4.
And that's a really big deal for entrepreneurs because it means that you can go from idea to prototype much faster. So, whether that prototype is, and I say prototype very loosely, because that could mean a business pitch, or it could mean, a website or a piece of software. So instead of waiting on a designer or an engineer for the first draft, ChatGPT-5 can kind of generate a starting point, and then you can refine it with your team or refine it with your designer, your engineer, or whoever it may be.
Yeah, we haven't really covered coding or prototyping yet. And I feel that needs its own series because, man, do I have thoughts, frustrations,
thoughts and feels,
all the feelings here, but lots of learnings too. But I think something that is very cool is you can run code from within ChatGPT 5 now. So if you ask it to build a wireframe or a mock-up of some app that you want to build, it will write that code. And then you can, run that from within ChatGPT. So it's incredibly useful and quick for prototyping and ideating. But please, and I know this is going to get, this could get our audience and, it's definitely going to frustrate developers. Please do not expect that to be production ready or anything remotely usable out in the real world. It's solely a prototype. But that's pretty incredible that you can have an AI helping you prototype a whole app.
Absolutely. As we always say, it still needs that human oversight. It's just a starting point, and then you build from there. But you've been mostly focusing on ChatGPT 5 this week. I know you've been using it a lot, and you're getting much more familiar with it, which is great. I've been focusing on some other research around prompting, and I think, again, we just need to update some of the advice that we gave in our original episode because things have definitely moved on.
Well, what did we get wrong?
I mean, I wouldn't say that we got things wrong, just that things have moved on because at the time, way back 3 months ago,
a lifetime
ago in AI world, those were kind of the commonly held beliefs about prompting. And it's just that the research has moved on since we last talked about it. So, for example, in our original episode, we talked a lot about role prompting, which was the idea where you start with, you are a marketing expert or you are a financial advisor, whatever the case may be. And that was a really big part of a lot of the frameworks that we talked about. And again, at the time, that was the kind of commonly talked about method of prompting.
Well, I'm worried about what you're about to tell me because I try to tell myself to use that all the time. I sometimes go back and say at the first sentence, you are a blank.
Well, unfortunately, it turns out that that's actually largely ineffective. Of course. There has actually been some research that's been done on this. And the research shows that while role prompts might help with the tone or the writing style, so it is still useful in that sense, they have little to no effect on actually improving the factual accuracy. So in one study, role prompts gave near zero accuracy in medical coding, but just a few examples boosted the accuracy to 90%. So you're getting different results and maybe a better tone, but it's not necessarily the more accurate information if you give it a role.
Okay, that's super interesting. So what actually works then?
So it's called shot prompting. It's essentially just providing examples, which is something that we always recommend anyway. It's providing an example just with a better name. So zero shot prompting is not giving an example. One shot is giving one example. A few shot is giving two or more examples. So it's pretty straightforward. But this way, instead of telling the AI what role to play, you show it examples of exactly what you want. And this is what the research has shown to be incredibly effective.
That's really interesting. So instead of saying you are a financial analyst, you'd say, here are 3 examples of how I want financial summaries formatted, and then show the actual examples.
Exactly. And, this makes sense from a business perspective as well. Like when you're training someone, you don't just say, act like a marketer. You have to show them examples of good work and say, aim to do it like this. And that way they learn to understand what good looks like. Because as we know, AI has every example of ad copy that's ever existed, but it doesn't know what is good ad copy or what is bad ad copy. So you have to be able to guide it in the right direction.
Yeah, that's a much better analogy than the role playing we were advocating before. And that makes a lot of sense if you just, break it down, right? And here's what
Absolutely.
else I think we've learned from testing GPT-5 extensively. Context is even more powerful than we thought. I could go on about this
Yeah,
forever, but
you love to talk about context.
I
Quite
really
rightly
do.
so.
Yeah. But also at the same time, it does need to be structured properly. So just dumping information doesn't quite work.
What do you mean by structured in this context?
Yeah. So the most
Context.
important context first, right? So it is going to prioritize. So most important context first, supporting details second, and then background information last. So you're almost giving it like a prioritization of which information to look at more importantly. Think of it like briefing an executive or your boss or anything like that, or your board. Lead with what matters most, then provide the supporting data behind it. We've learned this from years of presenting to really everyone, right? I think this is how our brain works. Don't bury the lead. You need to give the relevant information up front, and then you can provide kind of the credibility and context after.
I mean, no one's got the attention span for that anymore. Just tell me what it is immediately and let's move on.
Sure.
Yeah. So the other update that I wanted to talk about is called decomposition and self-criticism. And that sounds probably much more complicated than it actually is. Again, decomposition means asking the model to break the problem into sub-problems first, and then you solve each piece of that problem. So instead of asking it to say, create a marketing strategy, I say first identify the 3 biggest challenges in our market, then develop specific tactics for each challenge. So it's essentially just breaking it down a little bit more rather than kind of making it answer everything all at once. You're just giving it kind of bite-sized chunks that allow it to process each of those questions at once.
This just feels like we're starting to get, these LLMs to be more reasoning models that reason the way that we reason through as a human.
Absolutely, because you're never going to look at something like create a marketing plan and just answer it all in one giant brain dump. You're going to think through each aspect of it, and kind of you as a human would break it down into specific things. So why wouldn't we ask the AI to do the same? And then the other aspect of this is self-criticism. And honestly, that's kind of something that you should be doing with your team all the time anyway, which is walk me through this reasoning, or what could go wrong with this approach. So you're kind of challenging the AI a bit and pushing it and questioning its responses so that it comes back. You're essentially playing devil's advocate, like, and looking at a marketing plan from all angles rather than just kind of taking whatever it's giving you right off the bat. And this is actually something that ChatGPT-5 is really good at. So for example, after you get an important analysis, ask it to check its own work, grade its own homework. So review the above recommendation and identify any assumptions or areas where additional data would strengthen the conclusion. So again, it's actually just starting to think a little bit more like you would interact with a member of your team.
What I think is so great about this is, not to toot our own horn, but this goes back to our always be iterating kind of ethos.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It feels as if the model is now starting to really appreciate that kind of human in the loop, that iterative concept. But now I think if we do that, it was very important before, but now because of the way the model's been built and thought to reason, it's going to align even better with that ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's building confidence in the output even more. And sometimes it will reveal insights you hadn't considered. Like that's one of the reasons why this self-criticism is so great, is because it's asking it to give you a bunch of things that you may not have thought of, with all of its knowledge of, every marketing campaign that's ever existed. So if our original framework needs updating for ChatGPT 5, I wanted to talk about what we're going to call the 4C framework.
Jess, give me, what are the 4 C's?
Okay, so the 4 C's are clear, context, constraints, and calibration. And this is absolutely taking into account ChatGPT 5's issues with precision and that massive context window. So we're really taking advantage of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's start with clear, because I think that's going to be very important to start with.
Absolutely. So unsurprisingly, clear means being really unambiguous with what you want. Because remember, ChatGPT 5 follows instructions precisely. So any contradictions, as we just talked about, will confuse it. This is like managing a really good employee. You want to make sure that you give them really good, clear instructions, including the parts that you didn't mean to ask for, so that it understands and it knows what sort of output you want back.
So instead of summarize this report, I would say create a 3-bullet executive summary highlighting the main financial risks. Got it. So it's just like an intern. If I tell someone, make this better, I get back their interpretation of better, right? But if I say, increase the click-through rate by making the headline more specific and adding urgency, I get exactly what I need because I've been very clear and precise. I've been very clear about the goal or the objective.
Yeah.
That way that the model isn't interpreting what I need. So the more specific you are about the desired outcome, the better the result is going to be.
Exactly. So the second C is your favorite word. It's context. And this is where ChatGPT 5's massive context window becomes a real game changer for business users. We used to spend forever condensing information before you could even ask for help in and analyzing it. But now you don't need to hold back relevant information. You can literally just dump everything in and that will help. Well, I say that you want to prioritize it. You want to do all the things that we've just talked about, but it's a much easier way of giving it that context that it needs.
This is great for me because I need to confess, I've been doing this forever, right? I've just been dumping in everything.
Me too.
And then
actually.
I've had to go back and, try to give it the specific context and be a little bit more discerning, as we've talked about. Now, I'm just throwing all of it in there. But I think I will take the prioritization concept a little bit more seriously. But so for everyone here, what does this look like practically? What's the, relevant information that you should be giving it?
So let's say you're preparing for a board meeting. So instead of spending an hour summarizing all of your materials, you can now just paste them all into ChatGPT 5 and say, create talking points for a 10-minute board presentation covering these key themes. So that means you can give it, a pitch deck, financial data, customer feedback, competitive analysis, anything you think is relevant to that board meeting, you can put in and it will be able to sort through that information.
That's a huge time saver, not having to kind of pull out the relevant pieces of information. That being said, I still think that if we talk about the prioritization, right? If there's specific data within all of those examples that you've given it that you want it to prioritize, tell it. You need to give it those instructions as well. Just as we talk about, you don't want it to interpret what's important. You want it to tell it what's important. You don't want it to kind of go off on its own. Specific instructions are going to be really, really helpful here. So if the board deck that you're trying to build, you want it to focus on financial data, tell it.
Absolutely. But prioritization doesn't work within the 4 C's. So
yes, it's not as sexy as the 4 C's.
It's not as sexy as the 4 C's. So we're just going to roll that into both clear and context. So
100%.
It'll be the 4 C's plus P, which just doesn't sound as great.
But I think this next C is super interesting because it's kind of a totally new concept.
Yeah. So the third C is constraints. And this is where a marketing background is actually helpful, because if you've ever briefed a designer, briefed an agency, any of that, if you just say, make this look nice, you're going to get their interpretation of what looks nice. And that might not be bad, but it might not be exactly what you're looking for. So if you specify, the exact colors, the exact dimensions and fonts that you need, the mood, the feel that you want, all of that sounds a little, amorphous and a little vague, but that's going to help the designer be a little bit more precise in what they're giving back to you. So this is exactly the same concept. You just need to be much more precise in what you're giving it.
Yeah, and you have a lot more experience than I do, but even in my limited experience, for any creative brief, you want to specify deliverables. And I
Yeah,
think that principle
absolutely.
applies here, output as a table with a professional tone, 3 columns, no more than 5 rows. GPT-5 will nail those specifications every time. And it's not just about format. You can use constraints for, constantly for different stakeholders.
Yeah.
The same project update looks completely different when you're presenting to C-suite versus, project team or external partners. If you constrain the tone, the length, the complexity, even the perspective, you're going to get something, just way more useful. Writing this from the customer's point of view or explain this for a non-technical executive audience gives you very different results, which are going to be helpful.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Jess,
Yes.
what is the last C?
The last C is calibration. And that is all about controlling the depths of analysis. And this is really crucial for business efficiency because sometimes you need that quick answer that we talked about earlier with ChatGPT-5, and sometimes you need that really deep analysis. So for quick mode, you could say something like, give me top 3 recommendations in 3 sentences. And for deep mode, think carefully through all the implications and analyze it step by step. So
this change to the model is something that I think is so impactful. I think this is the biggest game changer
I
and has
agree.
really impacted how I work with ChatGPT. It's the difference between asking for a quick status update versus a comprehensive, post-mortem or in-depth analysis. It was why deep research was so huge, right?
Yeah.
Because I could really delve into a topic. Now I get that same level of kind of control in my day to day. I can ask for something really quick. You gave a great example around the weather, or I can really go deep. Maybe I want to be really deep about the weather and what are the type of
I mean,
clouds that are out there.
yeah, that's fair. Some people want to know about that.
But now we have that control. And so I think that's really useful from a user perspective. And unlike GPT-4, GPT-5 reliably respects those calibration cues. So if you say brief, it means brief. If you say
Yeah,
deep, it means deep. And that's really useful as you're going through in your day-to-day prompting.
exactly. So, it's the same information, but just completely different levels of analysis required. And ChatGPT-5 actually really respects those calibration cues, which the older versions often ignored.
Right. So putting it all together,
Yeah.
we have clear, context,
Yeah.
constraints,
Yeah.
calibration. I think
Yeah.
this works for any business communication task, right?
Absolutely. And let's put a P there in brackets at the end around prioritization so we don't forget that completely.
Mhm.
Um, but that way, whether you're drafting a client proposal or you're analyzing campaign performance or you're writing internal communications, you can use those same frameworks, but really just adjust the specifics. And that's the power of a good framework. That's why we love them so much. They're repeatable, but flexible. And
Mhm.
honestly, it's helped in general too, because I'm much more intentional about how I communicate with people that I'm working with. Like it does make you like anytime you brief someone, it makes you think through
Mhm.
the thing that you're working on yourself because you need to be able to clearly communicate it. So really at the end of the day, it just boils down to what we always talk about with prompting, which is it's just good communication. At the
Mhm.
end of the day, that's what it is. Clear communication. Okay. So let's now make this concrete with some real scenarios that our audience might deal with. So, Kyle, let's suppose you need to analyze why our Q3 sales numbers were disappointing. How would you use the 4 C's to help you analyze this?
First off, rough start.
Oh,
Rough start.
it's a bad end to the year,
Okay, using the framework.
Yeah.
First off, clear. So identify the top 3 factors that contributed to our 15% shortfall in Q3 sales and recommend specific actions for Q4. I mean, very
Spot
detailed
on.
response
Very
there, right?
clear. Yeah.
Okay. Second part, context. I would include the sales data,
Hmm.
and to our little bracket around P, I would say focus on sales data first and foremost, right? Then I would give pipeline reports, competitive intelligence, maybe some customer feedback.
Mm,
That's all that supporting detail that could
yeah.
explain why the sales data, is the way that it is. Third, constraints. Format as an executive memo, with a professional tone and include some of the supporting data in a summary form. That's giving it really clear cues so that it knows, what to provide and what not to. And then calibrate it, right? So think through this systematically and consider both external and internal factors. So this is where you're giving it like a really clear, like, kind of what's the space that you need to, involve? How deep or how shallow shall I go in my research?
And that's where something like customer feedback or wider market factors or, whatever is really important to feed it so that it has that context. And, because of ChatGPT 5's expanded context window, you can include the full quarterly business report rather than just a summary. Okay. So now let's say your development team is behind on a project and you need to communicate the delay to stakeholders. I think we've all been here, especially if you've ever worked agency side.
Yeah. This one's also tough. This one's also pretty tough.
No one likes these conversations.
Which is where, putting this and using ChatGPT is so helpful because you have a lot of that, like, internal anxiety. This is really about stakeholder management. So going back to our framework, clear, draft 3 versions of a product delay notification, one for the executive team, one for the client, and one for the project team. I love doing this, right? Where you actually give it the audience. So you can tell it like, okay, who's the audience, how to draft it. Secondly, context. So include the original timeline, the current status, reasons for the delay, and then proposed solutions. Third, constraints. So the executive version should be brief and solution focused. The client version should be apologetic but confident, right? That you're actually gonna right the ship here. And then the team version should be detailed and action oriented. You want to make sure everyone's on the same page, working and rowing in the same direction. And then lastly, calibration. Think carefully or deeply about each audience's concerns and adjust the message accordingly. So we don't want a shallow response where everything seems similar. You really want it to understand the context and each of those audiences' concerns and then, respond appropriately.
I think this is where the human relationship is really important as well, because you can input something in that calibration section about that particular individual. Like this would have been so useful when I worked in consulting. I once worked on a data migration project and the client was lovely, but he had very high expectations. And if you didn't meet those high expectations, he would kind of look at you like you just, kicked a puppy or something. Like, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. And, and
the worst words in the human language.
Oh God, it was so hard to, oh man, he's so lovely, but wow, that was a tough project. And so, if we had AI at this point in time, I absolutely would have been using this to rewrite emails to him to try and avoid that disappointed look on his face, because it's devastating. It was devastating.
Well, and also you would probably include when you talk about calibration, you would include kind of how that person usually approaches it and what your view is. Yeah. And that would definitely help, calibrate again that response. 100%. And this is what I love about this approach so much, right? It forces you to think strategically about that communication before you start writing. You talk about how do we become better communicators? Think strategically about the objective, what information you're trying to give, and then what objective you're trying to get out of that communication. That really helps you kind of ideate. So I think the 4C framework isn't just about prompting AI better. It's, again, like you said, being a better communicator, period.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's do one more. Let's look at a financial scenario. So let's say you need to prepare for investor discussions about fundraising.
Oh,
this is your dream scenario.
Well, this is like my everyday, right? This is just this, or maybe my nightmare. I don't know, one or the other. But, this is where context really shines. And so I love this example. So first, let's start with clear, create an investor-ready financial summary that positions our growth trajectory and our funding needs. Classic give and take, right?
Yeah.
But here's where context is so clutch. Include P&L statements, cash flow projections, market size data. Throw in competitor funding rounds, growth metrics. This is where you can give it so much business context that is very difficult to kind of take all of that and discern into a proper narrative. Then I would give it constraints, 1-page summary with a supporting appendix. I want it to be confident but realistic tone, or maybe I want to be actually like, I want to be really positive. That's something that, you kind of have to infuse a little bit of excitement, right?
Fake it till you make it when you're fundraising.
Yeah, I mean, fundraising decks really have a lot of nuance in how you explain that narrative. This constraint component in our framework is really helpful around that. And then I'm going to tell it to focus on scalability metrics that matter to VCs. So that audience has a very clear directive. They're looking for very specific things. The training data is there to give the model a way for it to calibrate that. So do it. And then lastly, speaking of calibration, anticipate tough questions about burn rate and path to profitability. This is where you might be able to kind of give it a little bit of a clue or some contextual clues around, okay, this is what might come up based on where we're at. And I want to be, buttoned up around this.
And with ChatGPT 5's reasoning capabilities, you could even add something like, identify potential investor objections and prepare responses. You can start almost negative prompting in a way where you're really playing devil's advocate and making it think about what could be wrong with this deck as well.
That's such a great example. I ask it to come up with questions all the time that I need to be prepared for. So, and not just the questions, but the answers too, right? So kind of start preparing yourself mentally for what's going to come. I think this is true for investor decks, sales pitches, any type of conversation you're having, kind of understanding the give and the take is really good. So again, it's not just summarizing data, which is very useful, taking all of that context, but it's actually thinking strategically about the conversation you're about to have and preparing yourself for it.
I think that's very smart.
All right, 3 quick wins you can implement today from this week's episode. So quick win number 1, replace role prompting with few shot examples. So instead of you are a marketing expert, show ChatGPT 5 2 or 3 examples of the exact output you want.
Quick win number 2, use the full context window. So you can stop summarizing documents just for AI. You can include the full documents and you just let ChatGPT synthesize them.
Quick win number 3, start adding calibration cues. This one's big. So for quick tasks, say brief response or 3 key points. For complex analysis, say think step by step or consider all implications.
And remember, these aren't actually just AI tips. They're communication principles that are going to make you better at managing people or managing your agencies or, whatever the case may be. It's all about good communication.
Right, you are. Okay. If you take one thing from today's episode, make it this. GPT-5 isn't just faster than previous versions. It's fundamentally different. It requires cleaner, more intentional prompting, and ultimately better communication.
Make sure you use the 4C framework: clear, context, constraints, calibration. It works for any business communication task, whether you're using AI or managing people, and also any tool. We've talked a lot about ChatGPT in this particular episode, but this is going to be relevant for any of the tools that you're using.
And our little caveat of prioritization within that context.
Yes, absolutely. Prioritization. All right, so that is us for this week. Thank you for listening to Early Adopter.
Quick reminder, this is one of our favorite episodes. So if you're tuning in right now, it's because we're taking a holiday break. And don't worry, we'll be back soon with new stuff in the new year.
Before we go, if you want to join us for our first webinar on the 4th of February, you can find the link in the show notes or head over to maven.com to sign up.
It's going to be a real live conversation with us and Sean. You'll remember him from our 3-part series around AI policy. So this is no script, no corporate speak, no buzzwords or jargon from us. You know how we like to hit that jargon buzzer. It's just us, you, and some good questions about AI and how to actually use it in your business.
And as always, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We are at early_adopter. Remember, no E in adopter. Send us your AI stories, your questions, your wins, your failures, your own AI gone wrong. As always, we always want to hear from our listeners.
And just remember, there's no E in the adopter.
Thanks for listening, and we will see you in the new year.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy holidays, everyone.
Bye.